What is the worst lie you caught your parents telling?
Story 1. I won't get mad at you. My mom said that to me when she told me to tell her when I decided to have intercourse. I was 17 and had been dating a college boy for about 6 months, still technically a virgin, laugh my butt off. When he and I finally did the do, I was terrified to tell her, so I left a page-long note on the counter and went to school. When I got home, she sat me down in my room and screamed at me. Definitely put a damper on our relationship. I had a similar situation with my mom, except she took it farther. I was 16 and told her I had intercourse with my boyfriend, who'd I'd been with for a year. I was terrified to tell her, and I was justified to be. I've never seen her so angry in my life, screaming, hitting things, threatening to hit me. She took away my cell phone, laptop, and wouldn't allow me to see friends. I was watched constantly and wasn't allowed to be home alone. She called me a B and an S and told her friends and my aunt about it. She made me take a pregnancy test and watched. She said I wasn't trustworthy enough to take the pill, so she put me on the depot shot, which caused me to have a nonstop period for 6 months. She threatened to have me go live with my grandma 5 hours away, whom I barely knew. I wasn't the daughter she thought she knew. I've never looked at her the same way again. Nothing says great parenting like S-shaming your daughter. Jesus H. Christ, why do these crazy parents think their teen having intercourse once automatically makes them a 8W who's going to sleep around and be reckless? Like, I personally had a really thorough intercourse education experience. I was completely prepared and made my college boyfriend wait many months. Somehow that wasn't good enough? Parenting really should require a thorough psych examination to qualify. If that was in any way practical or realistic or without interfering with bodily autonomy. I never got that line from my parents, in part because I was always open about most things with them. I was home for Christmas and New Year's my freshman year when I tried pot for the first time, for example. Came home late, and when I woke up the next morning, my parents asked me how my New Year had been. I answered honestly that I had tried smoking weed and kinda liked it. It was like they short-circuited. I think they said something like, "Oh, well, we're glad you had fun." They apparently had to talk with each other later about should they be mad at me? Weren't they supposed to be mad about this? They decided they couldn't get mad because it wasn't like I had lied or hidden something from them, and considering how they had both smoked pot back in the day, and to this day in my mom's case, they didn't feel like they could throw stones. I heard that a lot as a child, and I refused to say it to mine. I will tell him, tell me the truth or you get in trouble for what you did, end the lie. Edit. So what all of the idiots in my replies are basically saying is don't ever give your child consequences or ever put them in trouble and let them do what they want. No, you have no idea how to raise your kids. I'm sorry, you had crappy parents, but that's not my fault. Yep, one time I told the truth about something while still believing I won't get mad if you tell the truth applied. Got one of the biggest scoldings of my life. Made me really wish I had just lied. It's a good way to teach kids to be liars. Okay, to the folks who are saying, like, I'm not going to say that to my kids, I'm going to be honest and be like, hey, you could either be in trouble for that or be in trouble for that and the lie. There are parents out there who say, as long as you tell me I won't get mad, and actually follow through with that and tend to have really good relationships with their kids because their kids aren't going to try and hide stuff from them out of fear. I've seen parents like that. I've had parents like that. And it's kind of wonderful to have supportive parents who know that their kids can and will make mistakes, and the parent's going to be there to help them understand and get through it. Because I promise, if a kid does make a mistake, they're learning from it without you throwing a fit like a child.
Story 2.
Hey folks, quick content warning, this next story does touch on R. And so if you are uncomfortable with that, you might want to brace yourself, or you may just choose to scroll to the time code on screen and skip this story.
That my parents split up when they were young. At 13, I found out that my dad had cheated on my mom and she couldn't forgive him. Then I found out that this cheating had resulted in a 12-year-old boy. Yes, they split when I was 5 weeks old. Who both my parents knew about, but I didn't. At 21, I found out my father was R'd. Men being R'd by women, especially in the military, didn't really happen 30 years ago. No one thought anything about the barmaid serving my dad free drinks all night and insisting on taking him to his room. My dad woke up the next morning to 4 things. A note from the woman telling him she had a good time, my mom's engagement ring from when she'd caught him, a hell of a custody battle on his hands which he lost, a lifelong alcohol addiction. Just a side note, when my dad eventually told my mom as an adult that he didn't consent to the cheating and he sought help, she was really understanding and they are now good friends and co-parents. I find this to be extremely plausible, emphasis on extremely. Today it's well known that some women prefer to target military men because of the guaranteed money coming in, plus other benefits, and the military will side with the women 99% of the time. These women tend to frequent strip clubs and, you guessed it, bars. Some even work there as it's easy access to their victims. Women usually are men differently, it often involving some kind of impairment and or psychological attacks. I am not military, but I had an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman over the course of maybe 6 or 7 years. She would bump into me at the bars, be super happy to see me, and then start feeding me drinks. She would offer some weed too, which normally I knew not to mix the two because I just cannot handle it. However, once I was good and drunk, I would say yes, black out, and usually wake up with her naked next to me. A few times my buddy saved me, but this happened probably 10 times. Every time I would wake up and regret what I had done to the point that I would cause anxiety attacks for weeks. I would check to see if there was a condom or wrapper anywhere. There never was. Turns out she was using fake accounts to follow my friends on social media and would figure out where we were through that. It never occurred to me that this was R until now. It's that common? Something sort of similar happened to my brother-in-law. Years before he met my sister, he had a drunken one-night stand with some woman. He never consented to unprotected intercourse, but years later, when he's a married man with a family of his own, he finds out he has a secret son. Fortunately, the woman had no intention of having him be anything but a non-consenting sperm donor and was intent on raising him as a single mother. However, the kid eventually started asking questions and she contacted him asking if he would be willing to meet his son. The story has a sort of happy ending though. Our side of the family, including my sister, pretty much welcomed him as a bonus son, grandchild, nephew. Not the kid's fault, his mother acted like a C. He now spends 1 weekend a month with his father's family, gets along great with his half-siblings, and he makes sure he gets cool gifts for his birthday and the holidays too, so he never feels left out in that regard.
Yeah, folks, if this is happening, if someone is coercing you into intercourse or not getting consent from you due to, feeding you illicit substances, stuff like that, it's not okay. And you shouldn't feel ashamed or anything like that. You should tell someone that you trust, report it to the police, whatever you need to do. But please don't feel ashamed. Don't feel like you need to hide it. S-assault is S-assault. The end.
Story 3. Driving with the interior lights on in the car is illegal and dangerous. It is actually very dangerous in certain conditions. If you're on a dark road and the interior of your car is brightly lit, you have very bad visibility through the glass panes of the car. It is, however, not illegal. I was driving near dusk a few days ago while my daughter was reading a book in the front passenger seat. I turned on the light for her seat because she was starting to strain her eyes. As it got fully dark outside, I realized that I was having better night vision than normal. My multifocal contacts, like bifocal glasses but as contacts, switch prescriptions based on my eyes dilating. With the lights on, I was getting more of the long distance than the reading. Weirdly, it was one instance where having some light on inside the car was helpful. We didn't have full lights inside, just her light. I just wanted to play my Game Boy. Right? My parents would beam me out for turning the lights on to play it, but wouldn't fork up the $8 to buy me a worm light, LOL. It's too expensive. God damn, how many times have I heard that crap? Like, even for trivial stuff like watching a movie at the cinema with friends or clothes. I hate to be that guy, but are you sure it wasn't? There have been many times I've said that to my kids because it was. We had enough money for rent that month and some groceries, but anything else was out of the question. We even had to skip bills some months and catch up the next because the money just wasn't there. I didn't tell my kids that, but I did tell them that we couldn't be going out and doing other stuff. It wasn't my kids' place to worry about the fact that we were living paycheck to paycheck and barely made rent sometimes. It was their job to worry about school and whether the kid in the next row liked them. Story 4.
Hey folks, another content warning. This next story does deal with talk of self-termination, so if you're uncomfortable with that, you might want to brace yourself, or, as always, scroll to the time code on screen now to skip this story.
This lie was told by all parents in this town. Mainly, they told their children that if you got a venereal disease, then your life is ruined. The goal was to scare the kids into not having intercourse, but it had tragic consequences. In my hometown, a 17-year-old kid put a shotgun under his chin. It blew off his jaw and everything below his eyes. He survived, and about 10 years ago, I was in town and saw a very thin guy with no jaw and a cloth covering his face. I think it was him at about 45 years old. The reason he did it was not reported at the time, but many years later my mom told me that he tried to kill himself because he had a wet dream and thought the emission was a sign of venereal disease. His parents, like all parents around here, had always told him that if he got VD, then his life was ruined. There was no internet to answer our questions back then, so without being able to get any other information about what happened, he decided to kill himself. The parents of that town knew what happened, but they decided not to tell any of their kids the truth because it was better to risk more self-terminations than to provide any intercourse education. Oh my God, this is so grim. I hate that sexuality has been so stigmatized. People would rather have dead children than a kid who isn't a virgin / one who caught a STD / VD and needs an antibiotic or medication. Education only helps prevent the transmission of those diseases in teen pregnancy. It doesn't make people go out and have intercourse. I hope things in that town have changed, and if they haven't, I hope those parents and not the kids get the karma coming to them. Not my story, but a priest in the UK started the first self-termination helpline of the country in 1953 after he was deeply saddened after performing the funeral of a 14-year-old girl who committed self-termination because she thought her first period was an STI. Edit. His name was Chad Vera, and he also encouraged intercourse education. Kind of off topic, but my mom told me that a gyno's job is to scrape your insides and that you bleed and it's terrible. Talk about traumatizing someone. I still can't shake the picture of a doctor going in there with a scalpel. It's obviously not comfortable, but I've never even bled during an exam. People really need to watch what they say to their children about intercourse and their bodies. That could have turned me off from ever visiting an OBGYN.
I can't stand when people stigmatize anything, that has to do with intercourse, be it diseases, your own body. Stigmatizing an OBGYN, that's just... Don't do that, parents. Parents, please. I know that you're maybe scared of this stuff and you don't know it, so before you go telling stuff to your kids, maybe educate yourself. It's kind of your job as a parent to educate yourself before you go telling this stuff to your kids and messing with them in these ways. It's awful.
Story 5. That my mother was schizophrenic. I was 15 and knew she had been battling depression for years. Schizophrenia runs in our family, and as an angsty teenager, it was very easy for me to believe that she was crazy. She was completely convinced that my father had a secret second family. She was diagnosed and medicated for years. He did have a second family. He did have a second family? That had to have been devastating. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. Story 6. That the $2,000 I earned at my summer job would be safe in my mom's savings account until I wanted to withdraw it later. Never saw that money again. I lost money to my mom too. When I was a kid, I told her I had $50 in change. I don't know where it all came from. And she said I didn't. She counted it, and it was gone. She stole a good deal of my babysitting money. Hundreds of dollars. She filed my first tax return without telling me, and kept whatever money I would have got. She told me that the fee to get it done was about as much as I would have gotten back. Man, I really don't get parents like this. My kid is a toddler, so she has no concept of the checks people write her for birthdays or holidays or whatever. She doesn't have a bank account. Whenever I get a check for her, I deposit it into my account and make an immediate transfer to her 529 savings account for college one day. Not only do I not keep a cent, but I always round up to the nearest 100 or higher to throw some extra money into her college account. I couldn't imagine ever just pocketing any money that was hers. Gut-wrenching. When I was 20 years old, I worked for my dad and saved continuously for 10 months to go traveling by myself the day after my 21st birthday. I was good at saving money, but useless if my friends dragged me out on a weekend, so I asked for my dad to keep the cash, roughly the last 5 months' worth, and pay me when I reached a particular country on my trip. 4 months into my trip, I was near broke as planned. After crying for weeks on the phone to my parents, on other people's phone cards, and complaining of near starvation, I finally received £10, which got me 28 New Zealand dollars at the time. I was so scared of him, we never even discussed it when I returned home or since. But yeah, who was the bigger fool? Safe to say, I learned from it. I was forced to hand over a few $100s to my parents with the vague promise that I'd be paid back. It's been 3 years, I'm not getting that money back. It's worse considering that my brother was working a part-time job and had disposable income, whereas it had been less than a week since I graduated college and had student loans to pay.
I know that parents are just adults. They make mistakes. They screw up. Some of them are really bad with money and stuff, but it's your kid. And they're trusting you with money and doing that to them. Like, it's not just costing your kid that money. It is costing you almost any trust that your kid had in you. Like, is it ever worth it? Because I can't comprehend being put in charge of money for someone that I love and doing something like that. And I'm pretty bad with money.
Story 7. One night I went downstairs to ask my mother something. My dad was a light sleeper and would get really peed if anyone woke him up, so I whispered, "Mom, Mom." All of a sudden, my dad sat up and yelled at me to get lost. They told me I should never sneak up on them because they had a gun, and my dad thought I was an intruder and almost shot me. They scared the bejesus out of me. Sometimes when I try to get to sleep, I remember how my dad almost shot me for years, even after I moved out. Decades later, I mentioned it to my mom. She started laughing and told me they were having intercourse. There was no gun. Dad didn't want to go off half-seed. I mean, there was, and it wasn't in his pants. But that's a terrible way to get a kid out of the room, and potentially a quick call to CPS if a teacher caught wind of it. Story 8. That they couldn't afford to pay for college, so I took a job during the day and paid my way through night and weekend school. Turns out I had a decent trust fund from my grandfather. I could have graduated and started working for a higher wage 4 years early. I tell myself that graduating in 2008 wouldn't have been a good idea anyway. Oh no, I had the exact same story. I applied for a prestigious university and got accepted. I had a serious conversation with my mom that they will be able to cover my expenses for a year. After that, I'm on my own. I got scared, did not accept the offer, and went for studies in the neighborhood. Years later, I mentioned it to my dad, and he was shocked. They have money saved for my education, and indeed, they were very positively surprised I opted not to use the funds. Instead, they were able to sponsor my living in Asia on a self-discovery tour for a year after her undergrad. Weird, my parents said the same thing, so I joined the military to help pay for college, worked full-time, and never got out of the rat race. My brother, 1.5 years younger, went to a private school, then pre-med, and became an optometrist. I found out years later they paid for 90% of his education. I'm still a bit salty over that one. They didn't owe me anything, but they didn't lie to me. 2008 was a rough year to graduate, trust me on that one. Can confirm, 2008 high school graduate. A family friend even set me up with roughly $20,000 for college, but he had my aunt set up as the cosigner, and by the time I was 18 and could use it, the account was wiped for all of but about $50. To say I have trust issues with my family is an understatement. Like, I could have used that money to get myself a decent used car and work part-time instead of full-time or something. Instead, I had to save for 4 years while the same guy that opened that account kept calling me lazy for not owning a car. I live in America. At the time, I was in a place with next to no public transit, so he beat at me a lot. I have no money for a car.
Ah, yeah. And usually, the parents doing that are also the ones who are just like, if you don't go to college, you're never going to amount to anything. And they're like, okay, I guess I'll go to college. Can you help? And they're like, no. Fortunately, my parents were good. They had set aside some money, but we were not financially well off. I think the only qualm I had, and And no offense to my mom, I love her dearly, but when I very first went to college out of high school, I was going for a multimedia specialist degree, and I was going to be working with computers a lot. And this was early 2000s. And so I was like, well, can I get some help with a computer? And she was like, no, we don't have any money for a computer at all. And then bought herself a brand new truck. Now, to be fair, it was for her business, but she went way overboard with it and spent so much more, and that devastated me. Though eventually she did buy a new computer for herself in the house, and I got the old computer, which was good enough.
Story 9. Found out when I was 25 I have a sister 1 year older than me that they gave up for adoption. I'm 37 and have been searching for her for the past 10 years. My best friend has found 4 new siblings in the past 3 to 5 years. Apparently his dad just traveled the coast of California and got laid a lot. Are you in the US? DM me if so. I know a few resources you might be able to use. I don't want to assume you haven't checked them out, but figured I would offer. Story 10. Up until I was 8 years old, they told me that Daddy was away at college. We would go to see him on weekends. Found out later that he was in prison. I wondered why we could only talk to him behind glass on a telephone. Very strict college.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.